What would you do if your entire life collapsed right at the altar? My name is Roberta Hayes. 4 hours ago, I was supposed to become someone's wife. Instead, I watched the two people I trusted most, my fiancé and my maid of honor, destroy everything. Not in private, not days before, but behind the altar, at my wedding, in my dress, with her lipstick still on his mouth. Now I'm sitting in a dusty shed that used to be a pottery studio covered in clay and shattered dreams, wondering how I got here and why this broken place might be the very thing that saves me. Because sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who swore to stand by you forever. And sometimes the most beautiful revenge is healing louder than they ever expected. You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? I screamed those words at Blake, my voice echoing through the cold, silent vestibule of St. Agnes Church. My white silk wedding gown clung to me, like it knew the shame I was drowning in, and the echo of my heels across marble tiles sounded more like a warning than a celebration. Jessica's lipstick, my maid of honor, was still smeared across Blake's mouth, the same lipstick she'd applied in the dressing room while handing me tissues and saying, "You deserve happiness more than anyone, Roberta." The same woman who toasted to our forever at my bachelorette party. The same woman who helped me pick out the very dress I was now suffocating in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My name is Roberta Hayes, 27 years old, and 4 hours ago I was supposed to become Roberta Collins. But instead, I watched my 3-year relationship implode because my fiancé and my best friend decided to share one final secret before I walked down the aisle. They thought they could hide behind the altar. They thought I wouldn't walk in early. They thought wrong. Blake stammered. His mouth opened and closed like a man grasping for air. "Roberta, please." It didn't mean anything, he pleaded, stepping toward me like I hadn't just seen him with her lips on his. It was nerves, a moment of weakness. Just please let me explain. But I didn't need his explanation. I'd seen enough. I yanked my hand away before he could touch me. A moment of weakness, I hissed. No, that was a moment of truth. And then Jessica, still in her bridesmaid dress, no shame in her eyes, stepped forward, like she was the one who had been wronged. "Roberta, you have to understand. I don't have to understand anything." I snapped, my voice shaking. "You were my best friend. You were supposed to protect me, not replace me." Somewhere down the hall, the organ music began. My father was waiting to walk me down the aisle. My mother was in the front row with tears in her eyes. My co-workers, my cousins, my childhood piano teacher. Everyone was out there expecting a fairy tale, and I was about to give them silence. As I turned away from them, both clutching my ruined gown, Blake reached out one last time. "Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?" I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Anywhere but here." And in that moment, I realized the horrifying truth: I had nowhere to go. Not really. The drive to Penny's farm felt like both an escape and a punishment. 2 hours of winding roads, each mile echoing the clank of tin cans, still tied to my bumper leftover wedding decorations I hadn't bothered to rip off. The sign on the back of my car still read, "Just Married." The irony was so bitter, it could have broken teeth. I had called Penny from the church parking lot, still in my gown, still shaking. My voice cracked as I whispered into the phone, "Penny, I need somewhere to go. Blake cheated. With Jessica." There was a pause. I think she expected me to say anything else, but she didn't ask questions. She just said, "You can come here." Penny was 3 years older than me, married to Gerald since high school and living the farm life just outside Clarksville, Tennessee. They raised cattle, grew soybeans, and had 2 college-age boys, Dylan and Caleb, home for the summer. I had always envied her steady, quiet world, but now I was crashing into it like a storm no one invited. When I pulled into the gravel driveway near midnight, the porch light was already on. Penny stood with a mug of coffee and a look that said everything without saying anything. She hugged me hard like she could squeeze the betrayal out of my bones. And for the first time since leaving the church, I let myself cry without holding back. "The main house is a mess right now," she said gently. "We're doing renovations and the boys are sleeping in the guest room. But I've got the old pottery studio out back. It's got a cot electricity and running water." She looked at me apologetically like it wasn't enough, but it was more than enough. The studio was really just a converted garage from her artistic phase 5 years earlier, clay-stained, dusty, cluttered. Cobwebs in the corners, abandoned bags of dried clay, but it had walls and a door and quiet. That was all I needed. I stepped inside still wearing my wedding dress. The train caught on a stool. My heel broke. I collapsed onto a dusty couch and just stared at the pottery wheel in the corner. The same wheel I remembered Penny using years ago, her hands spinning hope from earth. Back then I'd watched her shape bowls and mugs while I talked about office drama and wedding colors. Now those stories felt like they belonged to a stranger. Before she left me to rest, Penny turned back. "I'm sorry about what happened today, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Blake never seemed like he truly saw you." I nodded numbly, not ready to believe her. Not yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there in the same ruined dress phone, buzzing every few minutes with incoming calls and messages. My mom's 17 missed texts, my dad's 6 calls. Even my boss had left a voicemail. "Heard what happened. Please call when you're safe." But it was Blake's texts that made me feel physically ill. "Baby, please come home." I panicked. "I don't love her. I love you. Let's just talk." One mistake doesn't erase everything, but it did. It did erase everything. I shut off my phone and walked out into the early morning haze. The sky was painted in bruised pinks and oranges. Roosters crowed in the distance. Cows grazed lazily behind a fence line, and for the first time in years, I was completely disconnected. Penny waved at me from near the clothesline, but didn't approach. She gave me space, the kind of space I hadn't even realized I needed. When I returned to the studio, something pulled me toward the pottery wheel. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way it sat there still and waiting. Maybe I just wanted to touch anything that didn't lie. I found an old bag of clay that hadn't fully dried. I added water, kneaded it like Penny once taught me, and placed it on the wheel. My first attempt, a total disaster. The clay wobbled. It collapsed. It slung off the side and hit the floor with a thud. But it didn't yell at me, didn't betray me, didn't lie. And somehow that made it feel safe. By the afternoon, I was a mess, covered in clay eyes, swollen gown, ruined. But my mind was finally quiet. Penny walked in, arms crossed, with a gentle smile. "You look better." "I feel better," I said honestly. "There's something about this that makes sense." She nodded. "Clay doesn't lie to you, doesn't cheat on you. It just becomes what you shape it into." I stared at the spinning wheel. Maybe this broken little room was the only place where things could make sense again. 3 days into living in Penny's pottery studio, my hands were cracked and caked with clay. The air still smelled faintly of dust and regret, but the quiet had become my sanctuary. I'd fallen into a rhythm wake at sunrise, open the studio windows, and sit at the wheel. Sometimes I didn't even create anything worth keeping, but each rotation of the wheel, each collapse of clay, felt like a heartbeat, one I controlled. Blake's voice still echoed in my mind. "You can't seriously want to live like this. This isn't you." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was hiding. But there was something honest about the dirt under my fingernails. Something real in shaping chaos into form. Each piece I made was like a memory in my hands, soft, fragile, begging to be held right. I started making small bowls, then vases, some cracked, some caved. But I didn't stop. I was alone. But I was no longer adrift, until he came back. It was a Thursday morning. Warm blue sky, and I was elbows deep in a stubborn coil bowl that just wouldn't hold shape. Then I heard it, the low growl of a BMW engine crunching up the gravel driveway. My stomach dropped. I looked out the dusty window, and there he was, Blake. in a tailored charcoal suit like he was going to a board meeting instead of ambushing his ex-fiancé on a farm. His eyes scanned the yard, then landed on the studio. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the door and knocked. "Roberta, I know you're in there. We need to talk." I didn't want to answer. I wanted him to rot outside. But I knew Blake. He wouldn't leave, not without forcing a scene. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and opened it, blocking the entryway with my body. "What do you want, Blake?" His face looked thinner, hollow. Stubble covered the chin that used to be meticulously groomed. "I want you," he said, his voice low. "I want my fiancé back." I didn't blink. "I'm not your fiancé anymore. Come on, Roberta, don't do this." "I messed up, okay? It was a mistake. Jessica was a mistake. We had history, but I didn't love her. You know that." He tried to reach for my hand. I stepped back. "I don't care who you loved. You made a choice. You humiliated me. On my wedding day with my best friend." Blake's voice hardened. "So what, you're just gonna live here now in a shed covered in mud like some artsy farm girl?" He glanced past me at the shelves lined with drying pottery. "You can't seriously think this is a life. What, you're going to sell bowls on Etsy now? This is beneath you." And there it was. The truth behind the mask. Not regret. Not love. Contempt. "You think this is pathetic?" I asked, stepping aside just enough for him to see the full studio. "Every piece in here has more soul than anything we ever built together." Blake scoffed. "You're better than this, Roberta." I stared at him, then back at my wheel. "You know what? Maybe I'm not. Maybe this is exactly who I am, and maybe that's why you never really saw me." He paused. His face flickered with something panic, maybe. "Jessica and I are done." It meant nothing. Don't throw away 3 years over something so stupid. 3 years? And yet when he needed comfort, he turned to her. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my voice steady now. "You did. I'm just finally picking up the pieces." He shook his head. "This is insane. You're going to regret this. One day you'll wake up and realize you walked away from the best thing that ever happened to you." He turned, slamming the door behind him, and for a second, just a second, I wondered if he was right. That night, I sat in the studio surrounded by half-finished pieces. Blake's words kept swirling in my head like water on the wheel. "This isn't real. No one will care about your little hobby. You're going to regret this." What if he was right? What if I was just playing artist in a barn, running from pain instead of facing it? But then I looked at the bowl I'd been working on all morning. Its sides were uneven, warped, but still standing. A little ugly, a little off. But mine. And for the first time since Blake kissed Jessica, I whispered out loud, "Maybe broken doesn't mean worthless. Maybe it just means different." It was a Tuesday when she showed up. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not her. I was in the studio sleeves, rolled covered in clay, and defeat wrestling with a vase that refused to stay upright. My focus was so intense I barely heard the knock at the side door. Roberta Penny called softly, "Eleanor's here." Borrowing some tools from Gerald. I wiped my hands and peeked outside. That's when I saw her, Eleanor Blackwood, retired art professor from Austin, PE, 60-something, silver hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes sharp enough to slice through excuses. She painted landscapes, now lived down the road, and was something of a local legend in art circles. She glanced toward the studio, then paused. "What's this building again?" she asked Penny. "Oh, that's just the old pottery shed." Penny shrugged. "My cousin's been staying there. She's going through something." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, to my shelves, to my clay. Without invitation, she stepped closer, peered through the dusty pane like she was reading a secret. After a long moment, she turned to me and said, "Whose work is that?" My stomach twisted. "Mine," I said cautiously, "but I'm not. It's just for therapy. I'm not really an artist or anything." Eleanor squinted. "You're lying. Those pieces, those are stories." She stepped inside the studio without waiting, her eyes scanning each creation like a museum curator. She picked up a jagged-edged bowl I had shaped the morning after Blake's visit. Deliberate cracks, bold imperfections. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "Raw, honest, painful, and yet intentional." I stared, stunned. "It's about betrayal," I whispered, "but also about trying to rebuild." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Have you ever shown these to anyone outside this farm?" I shook my head. "Just Penny. I wasn't planning to show them at all." "Well," she said firmly, "you need to start planning differently." She stayed for hours that day, asked questions about my process, my pain, my perspective. I told her everything. About Blake, about Jessica, about the church, the dress, the screaming silence of the ride to Clarksville. She didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just listened, absorbing every syllable like they were paint strokes. Then she said something I'll never forget. "The strongest artists are forged in fire. You're not sculpting clay, you're sculpting survival." She encouraged me to photograph my pieces, to create a small portfolio, to name the collection. We called it Broken Beautiful. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor became more than a mentor. She was a midwife to a new version of me, one I hadn't dared to imagine. She brought lighting equipment, a camera, a tripod. We spent long afternoons photographing each piece, carefully curating a story from wreckage. Each bowl, each vase, each sculpture became a chapter, a picture with a shattered handle. Loss of trust. A sculpture shaped like a heart reassembled with visible seams, choosing to love again. A bowl with metallic gold running through cracks, inspired by kintsugi, the Japanese art of embracing imperfection. Eleanor said, "You're not hiding your damage, you're declaring it." And that's when I realized so many people out there are walking around feeling like broken pottery, chipped, flawed, forgotten. But maybe they're not ruined. Maybe they just need someone to say, "You're still art." One morning, Eleanor arrived holding a clipboard. "I signed you up for a booth at the Clarksville Arts and Crafts Fair, September event." I nearly choked. "What, Eleanor? No, I can't. I'm not ready. I've only been doing this for 2 months. She smiled. "Art doesn't care about your timeline. If your work speaks, let it speak." I spent the next few weeks consumed, not just in creation, but in curation. I wanted a cohesive narrative, a journey from ruin to restoration. I shaped, glazed, reshaped. I cried, I bled, I healed. Each piece was a fragment of me, each imperfection intentional. The morning of the Clarksville Arts and Crafts Fair was bright, warm, and cruelly perfect, the kind of weather I used to imagine for my wedding day. Now, instead of walking down an aisle, I stood behind a 6-foot folding table beneath a white pop-up tent, flanked by bowls, vases, and sculptures that looked like pieces of my soul laid bare for strangers to judge. I had never felt so naked. Eleanor helped me set up the booth. She had made signage that read, "Broken Beautiful Pottery by Roberta Hayes." Underneath it, in small script, "Healing Clay, Art from Ruin." Every piece was tagged and priced. I had no idea what I was doing. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the fair opened. People wandered by, sipping coffee, petting dogs, dragging reluctant kids. I braced myself for awkward silence or polite pity glances, but instead, something strange happened. People stopped. They leaned in. They stared not at me, but at the pieces. One by one, they picked them up, ran their fingers over the cracks, traced the seams, and they talked. "This reminds me of my divorce. My son passed away last year. This feels like grief. I didn't know pottery could hurt and heal at the same time." The first sale came from a woman in her 50s, tired eyes, wedding ring gone. She held a small sculpture of a heart held together with bronze seams. "This," she said softly, "looks like how I feel inside." She bought it, then a bowl, then a vase. She hugged me before she left. By noon, I'd sold half my inventory, but what stunned me more than the money was the stories. People didn't just want art, they wanted healing. That's when a voice broke through the crowd. "I'm Dr. Patricia Williams," the woman said, holding out her hand. "I'm a therapist in Nashville. I work with trauma clients." I blinked, not sure where this was going. I've never seen pottery that captures emotional restoration so tangibly. "Would you ever consider making pieces specifically for my practice? I have clients who can't speak about what they've been through, but I think your work could speak for them." I was stunned. "Yes," I whispered. "Absolutely yes." And just like that, the orders began stacking. Custom commissions, therapy pieces, private sessions to hear people's pain and translate it into sculpture. The fair ended with tears in my eyes. I had come terrified that no one would understand me. I left knowing that my grief had become a bridge. 2 weeks later, Eleanor knocked on the studio door holding her phone. "You're going to want to sit down for this." A reporter from the local Clarksville station had visited the fair, seen my booth, and asked to do a story. Just a small feature, I thought. 15 seconds of airtime tops, but she had spent an hour filming, asking about my process, my heartbreak, my story. That story aired on a Friday night. By Monday morning, everything exploded. Emails, DMs, calls. People from all over Tennessee and even Kentucky and Georgia reached out. Some wanted to order. Some wanted to talk. Some just said, "I saw your segment. I left a toxic marriage last year and didn't know how to feel until I saw your bowl." Then Eleanor delivered the next gut punch. "I showed your photos to a friend in Nashville, Victoria Holbrook. She owns Luminous Gallery, one of the top contemporary spaces in the city. She wants to come out and meet you." I stared at her. "No, I'm not ready for a gallery. I've never even sold art before this month." Eleanor smiled. "Art doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It waits for you to get real. And honey, you're already there." Victoria came the following Saturday. Elegant, sharp, mid-40s, wore a silk scarf like it was armor. She said almost nothing for the first 20 minutes. Just walked around the studio, picked up each piece, turned them over, read the tiny handwritten tags I had taped on the bottom, "Still Standing." Fractured faith, the vase that knew too much. Then she asked, "Tell me about this one." She pointed to a bowl I had made after Blake's second visit. It had gold seams, but also a deliberate crack running straight through the center. "It's about how beauty doesn't have to mean symmetry," I said quietly. "Sometimes we carry scars we don't want to fix because they're the reason we survived." Victoria nodded slowly, then looked me dead in the eyes. "I'd like to offer you a solo show." I blinked. "A what?" "A full solo exhibition," she said calmly. 3 months from now, December. We'll call it Healing Clay Beauty Born from Brokenness. It's time people see what you've been through. 6 months had passed since the church, since the dress, since the lipstick. 6 months since I whispered anywhere but here and fled into the Tennessee night. Now Penny stood in the studio doorway blinking at the line of cars that stretched from the gravel road into her front yard. People sat patiently with paper numbers like a pottery pilgrimage. Some clutched tissues, others held journals. One woman carried a framed photo of her late son. Penny turned to me stunned. "Roberta, what is all this?" I smiled, hands covered in clay. This is what happens when you stop chasing perfection and start offering truth. The pottery studio was no longer a dusty garage. It had become a sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls filled with my broken, beautiful collection. A side table offered tea, a small couch for consultations. Dylan Penny's artistically gifted son managed inventory and emails after school. And me, I wasn't hiding anymore. I was guiding. People came from across the state, not to browse, but to be seen. A woman commissioned a sculpture to honor her late husband's sobriety. A teenager asked for a bowl that represented surviving bullying. A young man wanted a cracked vase for his mother who'd just walked away from a 20-year toxic marriage. Each session began the same. I'd ask, "What hurt you?" They'd pause. Then tell me. And then, I'd create. Word spread far beyond Tennessee. Therapists began incorporating my pieces into trauma work. Hospitals ordered custom commissions for grief counseling rooms. A university reached out to host an exhibit on art and emotional resilience. And then came the call that sealed everything a national lifestyle show, Morning Window, wanted to feature my story. We saw the local segment. The producer said, "You're not just an artist, you're a movement. People need to know what you're building out there in that shed." But as my life took flight, Blake and Jessica's came crashing down. They got married quietly 5 months after the wedding disaster. But the honeymoon didn't last. A month later, rumors began circulating. Jessica had opened multiple lines of credit in Blake's name. Blake had taken out loans using Jessica's father's business contacts without permission. It wasn't long before texts leaked. Screenshots, cold, incriminating, sent by a former mutual friend. Proof that the affair had started not weeks before our wedding, but 7 months earlier. Hidden beneath layers of late meetings and just venting, and you're overthinking it, Roberta. I didn't speak publicly, didn't post a thing, didn't even respond to the people who sent me the screenshots, because by then, I didn't need revenge. I had purpose. The solo show at Luminous Gallery opened in December. It was titled exactly as Victoria had promised, Healing Clay Beauty Born from Brokenness. The gallery was packed. Reporters, collectors, strangers who had followed my journey from viral segment to feature story. But more than that, survivors, people who had been betrayed, hurt, left behind. They came not for the art, but for the recognition. And as I stood at the center of that room looking at pieces I had once made in a broken dress with shaking hands, I realized something. Blake and Jessica weren't my ending. They were just the trigger. The beginning of everything. Today, the old studio has a new name, Healing Clay Studio Custom Therapeutic Pottery by Appointment. There's a wait list, a workshop series, and a scholarship fund for trauma survivors who want to learn the art of rebuilding through creation. We host story nights. We fire pieces shaped by grief, trauma, loss, and rebirth, and each one bears a mark, a golden seam, or a visible crack, proof that imperfection can be sacred. My father came to see the studio last month. He didn't say much at first, just looked around, ran his calloused hand over a piece titled, Still Here. Then he turned to me, eyes glossy, and said, "You built something more real than any wedding ever could." As for Penny, she never once asked me to leave. Instead, she turned the farm into a healing retreat with my studio at its center. What once was a side building filled with dust and regret is now a beacon. People say they come for the pottery, but I think they really come to remember that they're not alone in their pain, that healing is art, and that sometimes the life we're supposed to have starts right after the one we thought we needed ends. Some say the worst day of your life can break you, but what if it doesn't? What if it just strips away the illusions so you can finally see the truth that you were always the artist, the creator, the survivor? Not because you were perfect, but because you were willing to begin again. If you've ever been betrayed, left behind, or made to feel disposable, let this story remind you you're still here, you're still clay, and you are still art. Have you ever turned heartbreak into healing? Share your story below. I promise you, someone needs to hear it. Like this video if Roberta's journey gave you strength. Subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, resilience, and quiet revenge turned into unstoppable power.